You've been flying your drones around the building.
I don't actually know whether the drones were flown last night. Some combination of darkness and alcohol may have slightly discouraged us, but they will fly today.
So this is kind of a meta session. So you've got two editors of Wired, but Chris has been there for a decade now?
A decade.
So when we were planning our edition 3 years ago, I came over and learned what makes Wired, what defines it. But times are changing, because when we were talking, it was a print magazine.
Oh, yes. Oh, that.
How does print evolve in a world where screens are so much more important?
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right that it was a print magazine. Although, when I took over, I spent time with the predecessor at Wired, Louis Rossetto, Jane Metcalf, Kevin Kelly, and the vision had never been a print magazine. The vision had been a vehicle for ideas, and they used the best technology at the time. When they started in '93, the radical, mind-blowing technologies were desktop publishing, four-color presses, Adobe Illustrator, the ability to twist typography, and all that sort of thing. And so the effort was to understand what screen language was, that there was a visual language and aesthetic to the phosphors of the screen. And to some extent, this represented an opportunity to rethink how we communicate. And the print magazine was the best way they could do it at the time. But it was always, as you know, they started the first web media site, created the banner ad. If any of you know Apache, the web operating system, that was created at Wired as well. Hotwired, the first search engine, Hotbot. So they were really, the notion was really that we have an opportunity to convey powerful ideas and tell stories in new ways. And we'll take the best technologies available to us at the moment, which in print were inks and presses, but online were equally radical. Since you took over, it became clear that the tablet was going to arrive. And Scott Daddich, my creative director at the time, I think was one of the first to just sort of see the planets converging. It was a combination of sort of the screens and the thickness, and more to the point, the fact that Apple, which is kind of a market enabler, was going to jump before they even announced they would do so. And we decided that the time was now, that the time for a truly digital magazine, which is not to say magazine content just on digital objects like the web, but a digital magazine designed from the beginning to do that job of rich storytelling in a three-dimensional, an n-dimensional medium had come. And today we're a tablet magazine first, print comes second, and web after that.
And what have you learned from the tablet experience?
We learned that we don't know anything about what people want. Even the words, we're not even sure what the word magazine means anymore. We think it's probably linked to the word periodical, but we're not sure what the periodicity is. We don't know whether people want to go this way or this way. We don't know how much they want to engage. We don't know how often they want to get it. We don't know whether they want apps or whether they want it inside another app. We don't know whether they want to turn their screens this way or turn their screens that way. We think they want to lean back, not lean forward. We think that's probably pretty crucial. We think they probably want to touch rather than type. I think that's probably pretty crucial. But the basic user interface of a magazine, which we've known for thousands of years, i.e. paper that you turn, is being completely rethought. And nobody knows what the new interface of a magazine is going to be. Whether it may, in fact, resemble the old one. Maybe that people are innovating too much, and we've got this two-dimensional matrix thing where some goes up and some goes sideways and some go in. Maybe that's too much, and we need to adhere more closely to traditional magazine. Or maybe we have a poverty of imagination and someone's going to show us a better way.
Maybe it's not a publishing model at all. Maybe it's bringing a community together with events, with podcasts.
Well, we do have that on the web. I think at any time there's a radical medium shift, you have to kind of ask yourself, what business are we in? Are we in the horseless carriage business, or is this a whole new business entirely? Is television just radio with pictures, or is a whole new, mode of interaction entirely? And I think we have to figure out what is the web and what is a magazine, and make the distinction viable and make the distinction sort of real in some sense, because among other things, the web is free and we charge for our magazines.
You had a famous cover last year, "The Web is Dead," which was slightly misinterpreted in some of the coverage.
Rather intentionally misinterpreted. When you write "The Web is Dead" on your cover, you're pretty much asking for it.
So how alive is the web?
Well, the web is, depending on how you define the web is actually in trouble. We defined the web in that piece as being the sort of the Tim Berners-Lee original notion of the open end-to-end web. And if you're using Facebook, you're not on that web. If you're using your iPad or your iPhone or iTunes or Netflix or Xbox or any one of these other sort of closed networks, you're not on the web. You may be using a web browser. In the case of Facebook, you may be using the internet for transport. But the notion of the end-to-end web, the web that the Google crawler can see, is a shrinking fraction of usage of the internet today. And if you believe in openness, as I do, you should be worried about this balkanization and sort of colonization of what formerly was an open market.
Isn't one of the lessons, though, of Steve Jobs' success that the consumers seem to be happy with a closed, packaged web?
Absolutely, and far be it from me to disagree with the consumer. But what we are creating, and by the way, this is completely normal. It happened with railroads, it happened with electricity. Anytime you have a new market, 1,000 flowers bloom, there's this kind of radical innovation, lots of people kind of come in kind of different ways, lots of startups, and then very quickly, for largely economic reasons, because you can only make money around a scarcity, a bunch of monopolists come in and lock it down to basically what amounts to a sort of a series of closed markets. We spent 20 years, with the 1,000 flowers blooming, and on the web, most companies didn't make money. It's now time to make money. I totally get that. Consumers are gravitating towards these closed systems because they're a simpler, more seamless user experience. But there will be a cost. If in fact we do go for, if Facebook becomes the web, and if we just basically follow the lead of geniuses like Steve Jobs and Mark Zuckerberg and beyond, we have entered a different world than the one that brought us here. It is a world with less choice, less openness, and less opportunity for the startups of the world to make an impact.
So when I started reading Wired 20 years ago now, it was very Californian in its culture. It was a direct flow from the Well, the Whole Earth catalog, this visionary West Coast, slightly anarcho-tech idea. But now there's an Italian Wired, a Japanese Wired, a German Wired, it's going to be a Taiwan Wired. Has the whole idea of what Wired is changed?
Every time we do something new, we kind of have to go back to our first principles and remind ourselves what our founding myth and DNA is. And, I think that, that Californian notion is also the one behind Apple, right? This is also the one behind, there's a reason why these companies start in California. It's not that they're created by native Californians. It's that California is an idea. And that idea, it's, an area populated by immigrants, with immigrant genes. It's an idea about it's far from Washington, close to Asia. It's tolerant. It's diverse. It is culturally very rich. It's a place for crazy ideas and crazy people to do things that they couldn't do anywhere else. And I think that's the universal. If Wired represents anything, it's that radical experimentation is path forward. And I'd like to believe that although we characterize that as a Californian idea, there's a bit of that in everybody.
So in the decade that you've been there, tons has changed. The internet wasn't quite established as a mainstream consumer medium. The bubble had burst. Now internet is electricity, we expect it. So how does that change your view of what Wired is there to do?
My biggest problem, I took over in June of 2001. So it was, after the internet bubble had burst a few months earlier, but this is just before Enron had happened and WorldCom, and just before September 11th. And it was basically super bad, and it was going to get much worse. And pretty much people thought that this was the subprime mortgage of technology, that it was a hoax, a delusion. That San Francisco was the epicenter of this economic catastrophe, and I bet that there was a difference between the stock market, overreaction to technology, and the underlying technology itself. I basically bet that the internet was just beginning, and that the stock market was wrong. It was a very unpopular bet, especially with my wife, who I moved to San Francisco without asking permission, which cost me 2 children, by the way. I hasten to add, she added 2 children, not subtracted. What happened is we won, right? So the internet, it was right. The internet was just the beginning. The internet, as a matter of fact, if you look back at the statistics, it's almost impossible to see the dot-com bust in the adoption statistics. Everything that was predicted came true. Sometimes it was phase shifted, delayed by 6 months, but everything came true. But that's a worse problem, right? If you are a radical, revolutionary magazine, as we were designed to be, the worst thing that can happen to you is to win. You know, what happens to revolutionaries after they win? They turn into Muammar Gaddafi, right? You know, it's a very bad track record. Revolutionaries turn into tyrants like that, or they become counter-revolutionaries, or, you know. So the question, where's the place for a natural revolutionary? When everyone agrees, hey, you're right, you know, Marxism, you got that one right, now what? Just in our case, it was anarcho-capitalism, but, you know, it was hard to figure out how we could remain angry when we had so obviously won. And so we had a choice. We were going to launch a counter-revolution and, you know, argue that it was all wrong and we should revert to the caves. Or do we just sort of accept victory and enter the mainstream and say, you know, we're going to be a little less revolutionary, but our story is not sort of go technology, but more sort of, you know, technology is in our life. How is it changing our lives and the world around us, rather than focusing on technology itself?
So you've got a very strong role in telling us where the world is going, where the innovators are taking us. I just want to know how you get that knowledge. Who do you read? How do you learn what's going to be happening?
Yeah, I mean, I personally learn, everything I learn largely from talking to people and getting out there. I traveled like 300,000 miles last year, so I'm just, there's nothing like getting out there. There's the famous quote, I think it was by William Gibson, that the future's already here, it's just unevenly distributed. I mean, my job is not to predict the future, but to find it sort of unevenly distributed out there. And it is out there, and you just need to be open to it. Everything I talked about yesterday was out there, and I just had to go and find it. So I'm a relatively hardcore geek, and, you know, am drawn to what you know, sort of the alphas of the world. You know, what are they doing at the frontiers of DIY biology, things like that. So there's no shortage of interesting things out there. The hard part is trying to guess which one of these are going to become real, and quickly enough to change people's lives.
I'm going to put you on the spot.
Oh, yeah.
Wired, tired, or expired? Augmented reality?
Tired.
Peer-to-peer finance?
You know, depends what you mean exactly, but there's something to it.
Rachel Botsman yesterday was talking about collaborative consumption, the Airbnbs, the networks.
Yeah, there's definitely something to it. I think we're at slight risk of overswing there, but yeah, I think that'll grow.
NFC?
You know, whatever. It's something in a phone. It may,
Sounds
you know,
a little tired.
No, I mean, I'm not that interested in what's inside phones.
Okay.
You know, it's, yeah.
Privacy?
Over. Get used to it.
The natural user interface?
Explain.
The new ways we're interacting, like Kinect,
Oh,
without using a keyboard?
You know, I think it's kind of, you know, it's always going to be a little bit in the distance. I'm drawn to the idea. I'm always kind of constantly disappointed by the realization, but I continue to be drawn to it.
Apple in 5 years?
5 years, I think this will still be strong.
What else is wired?
Well, you know, I mean, I'm actually really bored by technology. I don't like gadgets. You can hardly, I was just telling someone, we banned all screens from our classrooms. You can't find us, it's very hard to find a screen in my home. I'm not really interested in that level of it. I mean, obviously I have a whole company that builds it, so I must on some level be interested. But in general, I'm more interested in what people do with it. I'm interested in feedback loops. You know, what happens as we start to surface information around us to help us make better decisions in terms of everything from our personal health to energy consumption. You know, I continue to be fascinated by, I mean, cars. I mean, I don't even know we talked about cars here today. You know, if you're going to pay attention to something that's really going to change people's lives, we are seeing a once-in-a-lifetime industrial transition with cars in every aspect. Their drivetrains, their autonomy, whether you own one, where they park or don't park. I was in Frankfurt for the Frankfurt Auto Show, and I was joking. Take a sentence: I drove my car to work. Right? I think my children, when they get to be of driving age, will realize that every single word in that is wrong. Drove. What is this driving? It's like riding a horse. You do it for entertainment purposes, but not to get somewhere. To work. People used to go to a workplace, and this work of which you speak, this notion you had a sort of a job in a company rather than being some part of some, Hollywood gig economy. I think that if you watch Cars right now, you're going to see. Between electrification and autonomy and the end of ownership, the sort of the shared vehicle notion, you're going to see something that's probably going to change our lives more than computers have.
Last question, which is a bit of a selfish one. How the hell do you manage your time when you're editing the magazine, doing the 300,000 miles, running the UAV business, writing those books? What's going on?
5 children.
They do the work.
Yeah. Well, the only way, all this sort of dovetails. I industrialize my hobbies. I co-opt my children as anecdotes in books. I just try to, it all sort of makes sense to me in some way, but 2 rules: no television ever, and don't watch sports.
Chris Anderson.